The luxurious penthouse gleamed. Under soft ambient lighting, its floor-to-ceiling windows revealing Chicago's dazzling skyline. Inside, tension crackled through the air. Marcus Bennett stood by the grand piano, his posture rigid, hands clenched into fists. Across the room, his parents, Margaret and Richard Bennett, sat with expressions as cold and unyielding as the marble floors beneath their feet. Margaret began, her tone sharp. This isn't up for debate. The wedding is in a month, and you will marry Isabella Montgomery. Marcus scoffed, pacing like a caged animal. Isabella Montgomery? I barely know her. She's practically a stranger. She's a Whitmore. Richard thundered, his deep voice filling the room. That's all you need to know. The Whitmore partnership will secure coal industry's future. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. Beneficial for you, perhaps. Marcus snapped, whirling to face them. But not for me. I won't marry someone I don't love. This is my life, not some corporate merger. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. Your life is a privilege, Marcus. One that we've worked tirelessly to provide. The least you can do is honor your responsibilities. My responsibilities? Marcus's voice rose sharply. What about my happiness? Or does that mean nothing as long as the company thrives? Margaret's gaze turned to ice. You're being dramatic. Love isn't the priority here, stability is. Isabella is a smart, capable woman from a reputable family. She's perfect for you. She's perfect for your plans. Marcus countered, his frustration erupting. This isn't about me at all. Richard stood, his towering frame casting a long shadow across the room. Enough, Marcus. Either you follow through with this marriage, or you're cut off from the family, the company, everything. Marcus's heart pounded. You'd really disown me for not following your plan? Margaret stood as well, her gaze unwavering. We won't have to, because you'll do the right thing. The room fell silent, the weight of their ultimatum settling like lead. Marcus turned to the massive windows, staring at the glittering city below. This conversation is over, he said, his voice hollow. Get out. Margaret and Richard exchanged glances, gathered their things, and left without another word. The doors closing echoed through the penthouse, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. Later that evening, Marcus wandered Chicago's streets, his mind racing. The cool night air bit at his skin as he walked aimlessly, searching for answers. He couldn't let his parents control him, but their threats were real. Losing everything he'd built wasn't an option. As he turned a corner, he faltered. A young woman sat on the sidewalk against a building, a worn backpack beside her. She huddled in an oversized jacket that barely protected her from the cold. When she lifted her head, striking green eyes peered through messy brown hair. Though wary, her gaze held a quiet strength that caught Marcus off guard. Spare any change? She asked, her voice soft but steady. Marcus stopped, studying her. What's your name? She hesitated, unused to strangers asking, more than her request. "Sophie," she said finally. Marcus's mind raced with a wild idea. "Sophie," he repeated, crouching to meet her gaze. "What if I told you I could change your life?" Her brow furrowed. "I'd say you've been watching too many movies." Marcus let out a short laugh. "Fair enough, but I'm serious. What if I could get you off the streets? I'll give you a place to live, food, clothes, everything you need for a fresh start." She narrowed her eyes, suspicion creeping into her voice. "What's the catch?" Marcus straightened, shoving his hands into his coat pockets. "You marry me for a year?" Sophie stared at him, as if he'd lost his mind. "What? I'm not crazy," Marcus said quickly. "I just need a wife. It's complicated, but it's strictly business. You'll have everything you need. And after a year, we go our separate ways. No strings attached." Sophie shook her head with a bitter laugh. "This has to be some kind of joke. Marry you? A complete stranger? I'm serious," Marcus said firmly. "I'll draw up a contract. You'll be protected, and I'll pay you enough to get back on your feet for good." Sophie studied him, her guarded expression softening slightly. "Why me?" Marcus hesitated, the answer clear, but too vulnerable to voice. "Because you don't know me, and you don't care about my money or my status. You're real." Sophie looked down at her hands, her thoughts swirling. The offer was outrageous, but so was her reality. She had nothing to lose, and maybe everything to gain. "Okay," she said finally, meeting his gaze. "But if you're lying, I'm out." "I'm not," Marcus promised, as they shook hands to seal the agreement. Neither of them realized how much that moment would change their lives. In the warm glow of Marcus's penthouse, Sophie sat tracing the edge of her coffee cup. Through the massive windows, Chicago's skyline glittered, a stark contrast to the streets she'd called home for the past year. The plush surroundings felt surreal, like a dream she didn't belong in. Across from her, Marcus watched carefully. His tailored shirt and polished demeanor seemed worlds away from her reality, making their conversation feel almost impossible. So, she began cautiously. "You won't need to marry you just to get out of another marriage?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but resolute. "That's the gist of it." Sophie let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You don't even know me. That's the point," Marcus replied. "You're not like the people I usually deal with. You're honest, real." Sophie's gaze sharpened. "You don't know that. I could be lying to you right now." "Then why aren't you?" Marcus countered, his eyes steady. Sophie looked away, her chest tightening. His confidence unnerved her, but the offer was tempting, far too tempting. A year ago, her life had been completely different. She'd lived in a modest but cozy home with her father, her days filled with music and dreams of performing on grand stages. Her father, a fiercely independent man, had taught her piano and guitar, nurturing her talent every step of the way. But everything changed when her father fell ill. Medical bills quickly drained their savings, forcing them to sell their family home. When he passed, she was left with nothing but a few belongings and her battered guitar. Too proud to ask for help, she tried making it on her own, playing on street corners and in small coffee shops. But the gigs barely covered food, let alone rent. Soon she found herself homeless, with only her music left as a reminder of her former life. Despite her hardships, Sophie refused to surrender her dignity. She survived each day with fierce determination. Even now, facing Marcus's bizarre proposal, every instinct told her to leave. "I don't know," she said, breaking the silence. "It sounds crazy." Marcus leaned forward, his voice gentle. "I understand, but this isn't a trick. And it's not about romance. It's purely business. You'll get everything you need: food, shelter, clothing, and I'll help you build a new life." After a year, we part ways. Sophie studied him, torn between caution and desperation. "What do you get out of this?" "My parents," Marcus said, frustration edging his voice. "They're trying to force me into an arranged marriage, to merge to companies. If I'm already married, their plan fails." Sophie frowned. "So I'd just be your shield, basically?" "Essentially," Marcus admitted. "But I'll make it worth your while. You'll have complete control over the terms. Your privacy, your freedom, everything." Sophie's fingers tightened around her cup. The idea of tying herself to a stranger felt dangerous. But so was the alternative: returning to the streets with no clear future. "And if I say no?" she asked. "Then I'll find someone else," Marcus said honestly. "But I hope you'll consider it." She hesitated, weighing her options. The risks were enormous, but so was the opportunity. "Fine," she said at last, her voice steady. "But if this goes sideways, I'm out." Marcus nodded, relief flashing across his face. "Fair enough. I'll have my lawyer draft the paperwork tomorrow." As Marcus walked her to the door, Sophie paused, glancing at him over her shoulder. "You're taking a big risk. You know. What if I turn out to be a nightmare?" Marcus smiled faintly. "I guess we'll both be gambling." Sophie gave him a small, uncertain smile before stepping into the elevator. As the doors closed, she let out a deep breath. What Marcus didn't know, what no one knew, was that she wasn't just a struggling musician. She was Sophia Reynolds, the estranged daughter of Alexander Reynolds, a once powerful business mogul whose empire had crumbled in a high-profile scandal years ago. Sophie had devoted her entire adult life to escaping her family's name, determined to forge her own path. If Marcus discovered her true identity, everything would unravel. As the elevator descended, she whispered to herself, "You can handle this. It's just a year." But deep down, she knew nothing about this arrangement would be simple. The first morning in Marcus's penthouse felt surreal. Sophie stood in the kitchen, taking in the sleek marble countertop and high-end appliances, feeling like an intruder. The fridge overflowed with imported delicacies, she couldn't pronounce, and the view from the floor to ceiling windows made her head spin. "Coffee?" Marcus's voice startled her as he entered the room, dressed casually in a fitted t-shirt and jeans. Sure," Sophie replied, her eyes still scanning the room, as if it might vanish. Marcus poured 2 cups and handed her one, watching as she cautiously took a sip. "You look like you're waiting for the ceiling to collapse." Sophie smirked. "It's just ... a lot. I've never lived anywhere like this. You'll get used to it," Marcus said, leaning against the counter. "Consider it part of the arrangement." She raised an eyebrow. "Right, the arrangement. Married one day, strangers the next." He chuckled. "It's unconventional. I'll give you that, but you'll be fine. You're tougher than you look." Sophie didn't respond, instead taking another sip of coffee and staring out at the skyline. She couldn't help but wonder how long she could maintain this charade. In the weeks that followed, their different lifestyles became increasingly apparent. While Marcus lived in a world of wealth and privilege, Sophie's independent nature showed through. She insisted on making her own meals instead of relying on the housekeeper. Much to Marcus's amusement, "I didn't think it was possible to burn eggs," Marcus teased one morning as she scraped a charred mess off a pan. "Don't start with me, Mr. Perfect," Sophie shot back, though her lips twitched with a reluctant smile. Despite the awkward start, they found a surprising rhythm. Marcus was impressed by Sophie's quick wit and sharp observations, while Sophie began to see glimpses of vulnerability beneath Marcus's confident exterior. One night, she found him in his home office, staring at a photo on his desk, a picture of him as a child, sitting on his father's lap. "You look happy," she said, leaning against the doorway. Marcus glanced up, startled, before turning the photo face down. Appearances can be deceiving. Sophie stepped closer, her curiosity piqued. "What happened?" Marcus hesitated, then sighed. "My parents have always been controlling. They see me as an extension of the company, not as a person. My entire life has been about meeting their expectations." Sophie frowned. "That sounds exhausting." "It is," Marcus admitted softly. "That's why I had to get out. This marriage arrangement, it's not just about defying them. It's about proving I can make my own choices." Sophie nodded slowly, her initial skepticism softening. "I get it. More than you know." One evening, unable to sleep, Marcus wandered through the penthouse and heard faint music drifting from the living room. Following the sound, he found Sophie at the old upright piano tucked in the corner. Her fingers glided across the keys, weaving a haunting melody that filled the space. Lost in the music, she didn't notice him until the piece ended. "You're incredible," Marcus said softly. Sophie startled, turning to face him. "I didn't know anyone was listening. I didn't know you could play," he said, stepping closer. "Why didn't you tell me?" She shrugged, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's not something I talk about much, just a part of my past. I'd rather keep private. Marcus studied her, sensing there was more to the story, but didn't press further. Well, you should play more often. You've got real talent. Sophie offered a small smile. Maybe. The arrangement faced its first real test. Weeks later at a charity gala, as Marcus prepared to introduce Sophie as his wife, she felt completely out of her element. "You'll be fine," he assured her as they entered the opulent ballroom. "Just smile and nod." "Easy for you to say," Sophie muttered, smoothing the hem of her borrowed evening gown as they mingled. She surprised both herself and Marcus with her natural ability to navigate the crowd, her charm and quick thinking winning over several influential guests, even leaving Marcus's skeptical parents momentarily speechless. "Your wife is quite the charmer," one guest remarked to Marcus. "Yes," Marcus said, his gaze lingering on Sophie. "She is." But the evening wasn't without its challenges. Margaret Bennett pulled Sophie aside, her polished smile thin and cold. "You played your part well tonight," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Thank you," Sophie replied evenly, refusing to be intimidated. Margaret's smile dimmed. "But don't think for a second that I'm fooled. I know there's more to you than meets the eye, and I'll find out exactly what you're hiding." Sophie's breath caught, but she maintained her composure. "Good luck with that," she said, turning on her heel and walking away. As the night wore on, Sophie couldn't shake Margaret's words. She knew the truth about her past would eventually surface, but what would it cost her when it did? Back at the penthouse, Marcus noticed her subdued mood. "You okay?" Sophie forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." But as she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, she knew this arrangement was becoming far more complicated than she'd ever anticipated. The cold precision of Margaret Bennett's studies stood in stark contrast to the warmth of the rest of the Cole mansion. At her desk, Margaret sat with her laptop open and a thick dossier spread before her. The face staring back from the screen was unmistakably Sophie's, though younger, surrounded by glaring headlines. "Scandal. Hanover Empire collapses in fraud." Margaret's lips curled into a thin smile as she picked up her phone to dial Marcus. In his office, Marcus was reviewing a new project proposal when his phone buzzed. Seeing his mother's name, he hesitated. "What is it, Mother?" "We need to talk," Margaret said, her tone clipped. "It's about your wife." Marcus sighed, leaning back. "What about her? She's not who she claims to be." "Come to the house now." The tension was palpable. As Marcus entered his mother's study, Margaret stood by the desk, the dossier open and ready. "What's this about?" he asked, patience thinning. Margaret gestured to the documents. "Your wife Sophie is Sophie Hanover. Ring any bells?" Marcus frowned, stepping closer to scan the pages. His eyes widened as the pieces fell into place. "Hanover? As in Jonathan Hanover?" "Yes," Margaret confirmed. "The disgraced mogul who lost everything in one of the biggest corporate frauds of the decade. That's her father." Marcus shook his head in disbelief. Why didn't she tell me? Because she's been hiding it, Margaret said sharply. Think about it, Marcus. She is using you. This is her way of rebuilding her family's reputation from the ashes. Marcus clenched his jaw. You don't know that. Margaret stepped closer, her voice low and venomous. She's not some innocent street musician you rescued. She's a Hanover. This was her plan all along. When Marcus returned to the penthouse, his thoughts churned with doubt and anger. Sophie sat in the living room, sketching in a notepad. She looked up as he entered, her smile vanishing at his expression. What's wrong? She asked, setting aside her work. Marcus crossed his arms, his voice glacial. Why didn't you tell me who you really are? Sophie froze. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play dumb, Sophie. Marcus snapped. I know you're Sophie Hanover, daughter of Jonathan Hanover, the man who destroyed countless lives. Sophie's face drained of color, but she held her ground. So you went digging into my past? I didn't, Marcus said sharply. My mother did, and she thinks you're using me to restore your family's reputation. Is she right? Sophie's hands balled into fists. You think I wanted this? You think I chose to be his daughter? I've spent my whole life running from that name. Then why didn't you tell me? Marcus demanded. Why keep it secret? Because it's not who I am. Sophie shouted, her voice cracking. I've spent years trying to escape my father's shadow. The Hanover name destroyed my life, Marcus. I lost everything, my home, my family, my dreams. All I've ever wanted was to be just Sophie. Marcus's eyes narrowed, his anger battling with a flicker of understanding. So none of this was real? Just convenient timing? Sophie stared at him, her chest heaving. You still don't understand, do you? I never asked for this arrangement. You came to me. You needed me, and somewhere along the way, I thought maybe, just maybe you saw me as more than my past. But I was wrong. Marcus looked away, the weight of her words pressing on him. Sophie grabbed her backpack, her voice trembling. You know what? Maybe your mother's right. Maybe I don't belong here. But at least I know who I am. Can you say the same? He had judged too quickly, blinded by his mother's manipulation and his own insecurities. Sophie wasn't using him. She had been surviving, fighting to build a new life despite her father's shadow. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering Sophie at the piano, her fingers dancing across the keys. She was so much more than the Hanover name or scandal. She was brilliant, resilient, and honest, and he had let her slip away. After leaving Marcus, Sophie returned to her sanctuary, music. She began performing at small venues, her confidence growing with each show. At a cozy jazz bar downtown, she sat on a stool with her guitar, captivating the intimate audience. With her soulful voice and passionate melodies, the genuine, warm applause that followed, her set soothed the wounds from Marcus's accusations. For the first time in years, Sophie felt truly herself, not as a Hanover, but as an artist. Your voice is amazing, a man said as she packed up her guitar. Have you thought about recording? Sophie smiled politely, but shook her head. One step at a time. Back at the penthouse, Marcus couldn't shake the emptiness. Sophie's absence had left. Desperate to make amends, he turned to Clara, his trusted assistant. "She's extraordinary, Clara," Marcus said, pacing the room. "I messed up badly. I have to fix this." Clara raised an eyebrow. "You're wearing your heart on your sleeve. Marcus, what's your plan?" "I don't know," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But I can't let her go. Not like this." Clara thought for a moment, then smiled. "If music is her world, maybe you should speak her language." Energized by the idea, Marcus threw himself into action. He contacted venue owners and industry professionals, pulling every string. He had to organize a private concert, not just any concert, but one for Sophie. He began attending her performances discreetly, watching from the shadows as she poured her soul into the music. With each song, his heart swelled with pride and determination. 2 weeks later, Sophie received an unexpected invitation, a handwritten note delivered to her apartment. "Sophie, you deserve to be seen, to be heard. Please come to the Grand Avenue Theatre tomorrow at 7 p.m. Though skepticism and curiosity warred within her, something about the note drew her in. When Sophie arrived at the theater, her breath caught. The intimate yet elegant space glowed, with soft golden lights that highlighted a grand piano center stage. The small audience comprised familiar faces from the music industry, people she had admired from afar, but never dreamed of meeting. As she stepped inside, a man approached her with a warm smile. "Sophie Hanover?" he asked. Sophie tensed at the name, but nodded. "I've been hearing about your music. I'm excited to hear you play tonight." "Play?" Sophie asked, confused. The man gestured toward the stage. "This is your show." Before she could process his words, Marcus appeared, looking nervous but determined. "Marcus," she said, her tone guarded. "What is this?" "It's for you," he said, his voice steady despite the tension between them. "I wanted the world to see what I see every time you play. This is your dream. Sophie, let me help you achieve it." Her heart raced as she took in the room, absorbing the weight of Marcus's words. "I fell in love with you," Marcus continued, stepping closer. "Not your name or your past, just you. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving it if you let me." Sophie swallowed hard, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "Marcus, you didn't just give me a chance, you gave me my dream." He smiled softly. "Then maybe some things are worth another try." That night, as Sophie stepped onto the stage, her fingers trembled slightly over the piano keys. But once she began to play, all doubts melted away. The audience sat captivated, and when she finished her final song, thunderous applause filled the theater. From the back of the room, Marcus watched with pride and hope swelling in his chest. After the theater emptied, Sophie found him waiting near the stage. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. "I did," he replied, "because you're worth it." Sophie studied him for a long moment, then smiled. "Maybe we both are." As they left the theater together, The rift between them began to heal. Later, in the penthouse living room, they sat across from each other, the air no longer charged with anger, but filled with quiet understanding. "I don't expect everything to be perfect overnight," Marcus said, his voice steady yet vulnerable. "But I want us to move forward together, not as strangers in an arrangement, but as partners." Sophie studied him, her green eyes searching his face for any sign of deceit. All she saw was sincerity. "It won't be easy," she replied softly. "Trust isn't rebuilt overnight." "I know," Marcus said, leaning forward, "but I'm willing to work for it every day, if that's what it takes." A small smile touched Sophie's lips. "You're stubborn, you know that." "So are you?" Marcus countered with a gentle chuckle. They both laughed, the tension easing as they began to rebuild what had been broken. Through the year that followed, Marcus and Sophie grew closer, their relationship deepening into something genuine. Sophie's music career flourished as she gained recognition in the industry, with Marcus attending every performance as her unwavering supporter. Meanwhile, Sophie helped Marcus navigate his complicated relationship with his parents. Though Gregory remained distant, Margaret's icy demeanor began to thaw as she witnessed the depth of Sophie's love for her son. "She's stronger than I gave her credit for," Margaret admitted to Marcus one evening. "And so are you?" Marcus nodded, his heart lightened by his mother's acceptance. 1 year after their whirlwind marriage, Marcus planned a surprise for Sophie. She had just finished a sold-out performance at a grand concert hall, the applause still echoing as she stepped backstage. "Wonderful show, Miss Hanover," a stagehand said, handing her a bouquet of roses. "Thank you," Sophie replied, smiling as she took the flowers. As she turned the corner, she froze. The stage had been cleared, and Marcus stood in its center, holding a small velvet box. The remaining crew and a few close friends, including Jenny and Clara, stood in the wings, watching quietly. "Marcus," Sophie whispered, her voice trembling. He smiled, his eyes filled with warmth. "A year ago, we started something that was supposed to be temporary a deal. But somewhere along the way, you became my everything. You made me see the world differently. You made me better." Sophie's heart pounded as he dropped to one knee, opening the box to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. "Sophie Hanover," Marcus said, his voice steady. "Will you marry me again? This time forever?" Tears filled Sophie's eyes as she stepped closer. "Yes," she whispered with a laugh, wiping her cheeks. But no more contracts. The audience in the wings erupted into cheers as Marcus slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss. Their wedding was an intimate, elegant affair in a garden beneath the stars. Guests from all walks of life, Marcus's business associates, Sophie's music community, and even former rivals, gathered to celebrate their union. Margaret, wearing a tasteful lavender gown, approached Sophie during the reception. "I owe you an apology," Margaret said, her voice sincere. "I misjudged you. You've shown strength and grace I didn't think possible." Sophie smiled warmly, Thank you, Margaret. That means more than you know. The two women shared a meaningful nod before Margaret returned to her table. As the night deepened, Marcus and Sophie shared their first dance under a canopy of fairy lights. The world faded away as they moved in perfect harmony, soft music enveloping them. I can't believe how far we've come, Sophie whispered. Marcus smiled, his hand tightening around hers. I can. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. And to think, Sophie said with a gentle laugh. It all started with a crazy deal. As the stars twinkled above, they knew their journey, filled with challenges, heartbreak, and redemption, had brought them to a love neither could have imagined. As Marcus and Sophie swayed beneath the starlit sky, their story stands as testament that love flourishes in life's most unexpected moments. Even in a marriage of convenience, their journey proves that with trust, forgiveness, and resilience, any challenge can transform into something beautiful. If their tale has moved you, please like and share this video with someone who cherishes stories of love and redemption. For more touching narratives, subscribe and enable notifications to stay connected. Thank you for watching, and we'll meet again in our next inspiring story.